Welcome to Make Your Mark Live. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'm super duper thrilled and excited to have Eric Kussin with me today, especially on World Health Day. But as we said, there's World Everything Days every day, but today is an important day across the board because of everything we're going through, all of us collectively, with this whole COVID-19 virus. And Eric has a special story to share with us about his experience with the virus in a few minutes. But before we do that, Eric, where are you right this minute?
Hopefully the landscape behind me in the picture helps tell the story, but I'm in New York City, in the center of it all. It's not, I mean, in fairness to what the media is portraying, if you walked out in the streets, you wouldn't necessarily know that it's mass chaos the way that they describe it. What's happening is the number of people that are coming down with the virus and then the number of people that need to go to the hospitals relative to the capacity that's available in the hospitals is creating a strain on the system. But you got to remember, there's 9 million people who live in New York City. If 100,000 people have the virus, and if X number of that 100,000, let's call it 20,000, need to be hospitalized for the hospital system, that's a large number, right? So the images that you're seeing are those people that are in the hospitals right now. But the truth is, just walking up and down the streets, it's more of a ghost town where people are wearing the masks and staying away from each other than it is people jumping into buildings or hiding behind any type of dumpsters or anything like that. It's not like what you would see in a movie.
Yeah, I think people think it's because I'm also here in the city and in New York, and I think people imagine that it's like the Walking Dead, and that there's people walking around everywhere coughing and hacking, and it's just sirens wailing. And it's funny because I'm here in Midtown. I know you're in the same area, Eric, and we don't hear sirens blaring all day and night. We don't. It's strange to us that we see all this and we don't necessarily experience it when we know that this is happening outside our doors somewhere. But what that's also means, Eric, is that people are actually paying attention to what they should be doing. At least here in New York, they're staying indoors. They're self-quarantining. They're staying in place and so forth, which is just what you're supposed to do. So hopefully soon we'll, as I say, flatten the curve, get past this thing. But before we get rolling, because today, we're going to talk about mental wellness, especially as it pertains to being stuck indoors and stuck sort of working from home, or and just not really being able to go experience life like we used to. So we'll talk about really how to figure out where you stand on the mental wellness scale, how where your mind is at. We'll talk about some of the things, the exercises that you can do, both physical and mental, that really boost your mental health and mental wellness. And sort of really also, if you are in any sort of you feel like you're really having a struggle, Eric, you're going to share with us some of the resources and some of the people you can call and who you should call and why and that sort of thing. But before we jump into all that, Eric, do me a favor and tell me first, I want to start with the juiciest part, which I think is the fact that you had the virus. Tell me about that story.
So for about 2 weeks before Corona became a big story, we had a partnership going with Warner Brothers. They were releasing a film with Ben Affleck called The Way Back. And so the fit was perfect because it was about a high school athlete who fell on hard times based on prior life experiences, the lack of relationship he had with his father, the loss of his son at a young age, and how that affected his life, and that trauma that really threw him off the rails to the point where then getting his life back came from coaching this high school team that he used to play for. And the interesting thing about the story was that it wasn't necessarily that the basketball was what brought him back. It was finally going and getting help that brought him back. So when you hear the movie The Way Back, you think of it as a Hoosiers type of story, and he's going to be carried off at the end on the shoulders of his players. That's not how it happens. It ends with him in a hospital talking with a therapist. And really finding himself once again. And so we were doing those different screenings with different members of our Celebrity Alliance, our Athlete Alliance, in different cities. So Cleveland, Baltimore, DC, Atlanta, Miami. And so in that trip, one of the stops that I had, unrelated to The Way Back, but it just shows how many trips there were in a row. I was going to Indianapolis because the Big Ten tournament was there, and Indiana Sports Corp that brings in the Big Ten tournament was asking me to do a mental health seminar with their group, inviting mostly college students and sports management majors. And I land in Indianapolis, and all of a sudden I get a call from the organizer saying, "Do you still want to do this?" And I was like, "What do you mean, do I want to do this?" It's like, well, all the games were just canceled. So this all happened while I was on the flight. Like the timing of it couldn't have been crazier. So I land because it was funded by Indiana Sports Corp and not the Big Ten. Indiana Sports Corp was allowed to do it. So looking back on it, I don't know if it was the smartest thing, but we gathered in a hall and we did the presentation. We got to meet a lot of the college students and sports management majors in Indy. But then I come home and then, shit hits the fan with the news about we need to stay inside. And about 2 days later, I develop 101 fever, bad cough. I remember waking up with chills where my blanket was so wet from the chills that it felt like if I got up from the blanket and allowed just the air from the room to hit me, it would have been like being in a meat locker. And that lasted about 4 days. I had a little bit of the lack of smell and lack of taste. But the thing I want to share with everyone, which I think is important, I called the New York State of Health to get a test. I waited on the line for an hour and a half. I told the gentleman I was symptomatic. He explained to me, even though he wasn't a healthcare professional, that I didn't sound like I was symptomatic, and so I didn't need a test, which I found, sadly hilarious. And then the two questions that he did have for me were, have I flown to and from China or Italy in the last 2 weeks? To which point I said, I've been on 12 flights in the last 22 days. No, I was not in China or Italy, but chances are the other passengers who were on the flights with me were either in contact with those people or on flights to and from themselves because of all the transfers. And I'm still waiting to this day. That was 2 weeks ago when I was told that I'd be called about a test, and I haven't gotten a test. So, it's unfortunate that some of us have to fight through it, the way that we do without knowing. I think there's a peace of mind that comes with it. There's, other than what we're hearing with the hydroxychloroquine and the Z-Pak, there's really no way that they're directly able to treat it. And obviously, if anyone's feeling respiratory symptoms where there's shortness of breath, and not just a cough, I think that's important to tell people. Like, I think what scared the shit out of everyone at the beginning was, if you have a cough and you have a fever, you've got corona, and now you have a chance to die because you've got corona. And again, I'm not meaning to take it lightly, but there's colds this time of year, there's flus this time of year, there's pneumonia this time of year. Those things happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have corona just because these symptoms are similar to that. So the real main one is, and you can buy one of those monitors to check your oxygen level. You could do a test where you take a deep breath and you hold it in for 10 seconds. And if you're able to hold it in and you're not coughing back out and you're not short of breath as you're holding that breath in, pretty good sign that your lungs are doing okay. Again, I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm just sharing the tidbits and the feedback that I got from my professionals that I hear from.
That's great. And what's interesting about all that is that we do hear every day there's something new. You should wear a mask. You shouldn't wear a mask. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. I'm hoping that there will be a day where they encourage everybody to eat pancakes to get better, but I'm not sure if that will happen. But in the meantime, you went through, you have a really interesting background, Eric, and what makes you such an authority in this space. I promise you, years ago, you didn't say, you know what, I really want to be the mental wellness guy. That was so far from your mind. You were cranking along in the sports industry. You loved it. You were part of that whole sort of exciting scene and so forth. And then things sort of took a turn. So do me a favor and give me just a quick rundown. I know it's not a quick story, but if you can try to make it quick, because there's some really important stuff to tackle in a second. But give me a sense of a little bit about how you were cranking along in your 20s and so on with your career, and then what happened?
Yeah, so repeat for anyone who saw the first episode, but essentially, rise the ranks of this crazy industry where it's all competitive, and I get to be the chief revenue officer after going to different markets. with the Florida Panthers as their new ownership group purchased the team. And essentially, shit hits the fan for me. Like the best way I could describe it to people is think of a robot that's programmed through AI to act like a human being. And you and I went to the back of that robot and cut the wires, and the robot's all of a sudden doing this and rolling its head back and forth and its eyes rolling back. That's essentially what I felt like. My cognitive abilities just stopped, and spent 2.5 years laying in a bed, staring at the ceiling, not watching TV, not listening to the radio, tried 50 different psychotropic drug combinations. None of those worked. TMS therapy, where they shoot electromagnetic waves in your brain. None of those work. Shock therapy, where they put electrodes on your brain and actually shock you into seizure to try and wake you up. Those didn't work. And ultimately what I learned, much Cliff Notes version of the story is I had this trauma history, which I didn't know what trauma was at the time, but it was this buildup of my brother, older than me. I'm the middle of 3 boys, but broke his femur bone, was in a body cast for a year, homeschooled. ALL, a children's form of leukemia, for 5 years, chemo, radiation, all that fun stuff. Goes into remission, flies out of a Jeep Wrangler that his friend's driving erratically, lands on his head, cracks his head open, loses partial vision in his eye. Goes to college, is diagnosed with a relapse of the same leukemia. They have to give him a stronger chemo regimen. It knocks the shit out of him, and his temperature goes through the roof, goes to the hospital, and they find out that he's got septic shock, which is your organs attacking themselves. So that sends him into a coma. He's in a coma for 3 months. We don't know if he's going to wake or if he's going to have any brain activity. Finally wakes, and his kidneys fail from the rigor of the septic shock. So my father ends up being the closest match, donates a kidney to him. That all ends, and in the course of the next year, 3 of my close friends in their upper 20s all pass away from heart conditions unexpectedly. So what I learned about mental health, and the reason why I kind of shit hit the fan for me and why I was taken down, is I understood now that there's these things that we witness in life that we live through: job losses, divorces, breakups, bullying, cyberbullying, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, loss of loved ones, sickness of loved ones. I could name a list of 200 things that we don't necessarily live through ourselves. We could live through vicariously through our friends and family and what they go through, and those things impact our mental health. And I think the fascinating thing about what's happening, and we'll dive deeper when you get going with the questions, what's happening right now with Corona is this concept of what stress and trauma is, and this misnomer of what mental health is previously before Corona. I think the majority of society, because of the messages that have been sent to us, have been, oh, mental health means mental illness. You are born with this thing called, or this thing genetically develops in you called bipolar, PTSD, OCD, depression, and you either have it or you don't. And what everyone right now, I shouldn't say everyone, let's say the majority of people are waking up to the fact is, nah, our mental health, just like our physical health, the stuff that we see, combined with the genetics, combined with our lifestyle, combined with our nutrition, all of that impacts this brain-body connection that we have. And so as we're going through these stressful events, as we're going through these uncertainties with Corona, of course, that's affecting mental health for all of us. And if there's any silver lining to this, it's very hard to find a silver lining when so many people get sick, especially when so many people die. The hope is that what comes out from this is a greater understanding that mental health is a topic for all of us. It's not a topic for just those 1 in 5 people that get this diagnosis as mentally ill.
That's great. So one thing I'm curious about, and you mentioned that you were, you were chief revenue officer at Panthers, and then you spent these 2.5 years in bed, basically. But was it something that happened really quickly? Was it a gradual thing? How did you even know that that was happening to you? And I'm just wondering, what was the onset like?
Looking back, there were certainly signs, things that I didn't necessarily notice. Little idiosyncrasies that happen when you're a kid, like feeling like the room is spinning, and they would describe that as it's a neurological problem, or hearing ringing in your ears, right? And so you don't put 2 and 2 together, especially back in the 80s and 90s. No one was thinking about mental health in that level. So you go to these doctors who have these specialties in certain areas, and they're looking inside the brain. And I remember doing these tests where I'm literally spinning on a chair, and they're trying to figure out if I have a inner ear problem where I can't, balance properly. But what happened in Florida was I think what's fascinating probably for most of the people in the audience who are either athletes or high performance individuals is the fact that I loved what I did every single day. I went from being an athlete to now working in sports the first day out of school. I go to work for the NBA. I go to work for 2 NBA teams. I go to work for 2 NHL teams. To me, that was my distraction. As much as I loved it, what I wasn't doing was I wasn't dealing with all these things that I described with my brother and my friends that had happened to me in the past. So when you asked, did it just come up and hit on me? For about a 2-week period, yes, the things started to unravel and I started to lose interest in things outside of the office and started to lose functioning, but it almost felt like it happened overnight, how quickly that 2-week period happened. But it was a buildup of all of those things over those years that then led to, here's the best analogy I can give you. We take away pieces of a Jenga tower over and over and over again in a game of Jenga, and then it takes one last piece and the tower topples over. But if you looked at the top of that Jenga tower, you didn't look at the bottom of it, and that's the only view that you got, you'd see this solid structure at the top where all these chips were stacked at the top. That's the way all of us are walking around. Oh, I'm a confident guy. I'm a confident girl. Like, things are going great. I'm loving my job. Meanwhile, what's going on beneath the surface? And especially in a society where we're not open to sharing what's going on beneath the surface, it just takes one more pull of one more piece of that Jenga puzzle for the tower to topple over.
That's a great analogy. And, I think that each of us has some degree of that Jenga thing going. And, it's funny because I know one thing you talk about is 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, right? And we'll talk about 5 out of 5 in a minute, but I think most of us will say, well, no, I'm good. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm all that sort of thing. But I think now with this whole virus stuff, things have shifted a little bit. Some people are able to adjust, I think, better than others, and for no specific reason. I mean, this is impacting us, everybody in a different way, right? It's some people are, now that they're sort of confined, they feel confined and they feel like they need to break out. Other people are like, oh, they're adapting, they're making do. Some people are seeing this as a great opportunity to, whether it's bond more with their family or learn more through opportunities like this presentation. But I think what's important to me, Eric, is how can people that are going through this right now, give me a couple ideas of, well, what's the best way to really figure out, well, are we, and I know you use the term crazy, but are we going crazy? I mean, what's our level of sanity as we go through this? How do we measure that?
No, sure. All right. So first is, mental health is not like physical health from the standpoint of, I can't take a thermometer, check that I have 103 fever, and do that same thing for my mental health, right? I can't take a blood test and count how many white blood cells I have like I can, with cancer. I can't do that for my mental health, right? So in the absence of that, it's a very subjective measure, right? And so if you go to websites and you look at different, resources that are out there, you'll read things like, if you have 5 of the following 20 symptoms for 2 weeks or more, here's a chance that you have this disorder. I'm not a big disorder person. I think disorders are used for insurance purposes. And then when doctors with medications try and throw darts at the dartboard, they're hoping that this is a better, more targeted dart based on the symptoms that they're seeing. Let's start with acknowledging that all of us, and this is not meant as the 5 and 5 thing, which is a more grandiose message. This is just meant for this particular period with COVID. There's not a single person on this planet. If you have any type of human feelings whatsoever, if you're not a sociopath, your mental health has been affected by going through this. It's an impossibility for it not to. And for us to acknowledge that is so important, right? Because of all the things that we are dealing with right now, the what if scenarios. What if I get sick? What if a family member gets sick? What if in my getting sick or my family member getting sick, it becomes a critical case and we start to go downhill? What's going to happen with my job? Am I going to keep my job? What's going to happen even if I don't keep my job? What is my next career path going to be, right? I don't feel like I have purpose and identity right now because I'm not waking up and doing the same things every day that I did before, right? So you've got the immediacy of what we're dealing with mental health in the moment about the what ifs about Corona. The other piece of that I don't think a lot of people think about is all the things that were used as distractions for us in the past going into work nonstop, watching games on TV at the end of the day, all these things that we, taking our kids back and forth to school, going to the gym back and forth, those are, as much as a lot of those things are positive things, they're also distraction mechanisms that distract us from dealing with, like I gave my example of the stuff that happened to my brother. Not everyone is going to go through what I went through my brother, but everyone has a past. Everyone's been through stuff. And so the second piece of what's coming up in terms of mental health for everyone who's going through what's going on with Corona and being in our house right now is you've got the immediacy of the what ifs, but then you've got all the underlying stuff that used to be sitting beneath the surface that's starting to rise up into our conscious brain. And now you combine all these things together and people feel lost and they feel like they're floating and they feel like they don't have purpose and they feel like they don't have an agenda. And they're like, where do I go from here? So first, I would say acknowledgement of knowing something's going on is that feeling of, I almost call it like, the black hole almost in a way, right? Like when we take for granted, when we wake up every day pre-corona, you've got this routine in your mind. You know what you're doing the next 2 days, 5 days, 2 weeks, 10 weeks. You know what your goals are. You know what your objectives are. You know what you're reaching towards. Right now, that's got taken away from us, right? So when you feel like you're floating, okay, you're in the mode where you're affected. But now let's talk about the actual physical effects of what these things do to us. So it's things like having a difficult time waking up in the morning. And I don't mean that you're not going to sleep a little extra because you have time. I mean, you wake up and you feel like you're as tired when you wake up as you were when you went to bed. Okay, that's one telltale sign. Another telltale sign, you're not in the mood to go through your self-care routine. And I'm not even talking about like actual scheduling of things to do. I'm talking about like the brushing of the teeth, the doing the hair, the putting the clothes on. When you're not feeling in the mood to do those things, it's your body telling you you're not in the right rhythm to be doing those things. And that's not a good place to be, right? So just your day-to-day being impacted is a big change overall. Then you go to things like cognitive, right? And so for me, I notice it myself is the clarity with which I'm able to think and process things. So yes, we're all doing work at home right now, and it's easy to blame it on, oh, well, Netflix is on the background, that's why I can't concentrate. But when we're sitting at a computer and we're not able to put thoughts together in a linear pattern, again, there's a sign right there, right? So now on top of the cognitive things, there's also physical things. So I'm starting to feel a pain in my neck. I'm starting to feel an ache in my back, okay? People might say, well, Eric, how in the world does physical health stuff get impacted by mental health stuff? It's because we have meridians in our body. They're energy highways where energy runs through. When we feel certain ways where we're getting tense, where we're getting anxious, where fear and stress and trauma is building, what we do is we hold ourselves in certain ways. That's what causes those tension pains. So those neck pains, those back pains, those GI problems that we have, right? A lot of men have problems in their psoas muscle, which is kind of by their stomach, and it's hard to bend one way or another. And so noticing that it's this entire spectrum of different things that can impact us. And, one of the things that we use as a tool to try and help people to discover how they're feeling and to track how they're feeling, I'd sent it to you in a chart. It's something that we use with school children, but the thing is, it's become so kind of accepted amongst even adults as well, because the teachers are using it with the students and the teachers are finding it valuable, but we call it the Same Here scale. And the idea behind that scale is to say, there it is right there, is that there's 6 places on that scale. Now, typically when that's available on web version or in a chart where we have an app available, that scale right there shows the different places that all of us could be fluctuating in on any given day, any given week, any given month, any given year even, right? So if you look on the left, thriving is a place we'd all love to be, but kind of going down from there, it's gliding, surviving, fluctuating, struggling, sinking. And some things to point out on that scale that I want to make sure everyone is aware of is it was designed to make sure that there were only 6 places, I should say purposely, that there were 6 places on that scale and not 7. And you might say, what's the difference between 6 and 7? If we had a 7th spot on that scale, there would be a middle point. That middle point would allow people to defer to the most common conversation that happens across the world millions of times a day, which is, hey, Mark, how are you doing? Good.
Okay.
And you are good, right? Or fine. And then people would pick that middle. So by having surviving and fluctuating in the middle there, we could get a sense from talking to a person or being honest with ourselves. Am I more on the okay side of I'm moving in a good direction, or am I more on the okay side of things are starting to feel like they're slipping a little bit? And the beautiful thing about this is, again, the app will be coming out with this soon, is you can track where you're at. We've got schools that have these hung with posters all over the schools. It creates a common language for us and between each other. So for us individually, I can look at that and say, I could see where I would fall in that surviving category. I'm not gliding yet to where things are just going along well. It's more of like I'm just getting by, right? Okay, I noticed that. Versus I'm fluctuating, like I'm getting by, but like there's a lot of lows coming down with these highs, a lot of lows coming down with these highs. And so I think that these terms and these faces are universal enough that it's easy for people to pick where they're at and then be able to track, I'm feeling this way versus I'm feeling that way.
This is great because it's it's interesting because this is not sort of like you're always sinking or you're always thriving. I think people on a sort of daily and even hourly basis kind of go through a lot of these throughout the course of the day. But I think what you're talking about is really taking a look at this in totality and saying, look, for the most part, on average, am I surviving? Am I struggling? Am I thriving? Am I whatever it is? And this is an absolutely fabulous scale. I mean, it's really good. Now, let me stop that for a sec. But this is something I can make available to everybody afterwards. I think it's really a great resource to look at and so forth. So, Eric, in terms of, sort of, I think, we're learning now about how to self-assess and really get a good sense of where we stand and so forth. And look, in my case, for example, I think that, honestly, I always like to think I'm a thriving, I'm a guy on the left over there. But honestly, also, I'm disappointed that a lot of things that I used to do in my life are on hold or gone or whatever it is. And then I know some people have been sick and lots of people have lost loved ones and so forth. What do you think? What can we all do, or what are some of the things that we think we can do that can make us more towards the left? I mean, are there certain things that you recommend that we do to get us more towards the right?
So, I think acknowledging first off that things have changed is a big piece of it, right? And so it's interesting that you brought up the example that you did. Like, I loved playing basketball in rec leagues for so long. And then I got sick, and then I got into this pattern of doing this stuff and traveling around on a daily basis. And I don't even miss playing basketball. That's not a good sign, right? And I'm using myself as an example so that people don't feel like I would point anyone else out, but put yourself in my shoes of whatever it is that you were excited about. If that's no longer something that you're excited about, you're going to have like old school people say, well, your priorities have changed and now you've got other things that are important. The truth of the matter is we have like, these neurotransmitters in our brain that light up and dopamine that gets us excited about things. The chances that I went from someone who loved playing basketball to all of a sudden it just doesn't matter to me anymore because other things matter more, I don't buy that. I think that that's a sign that things aren't going in the right direction, and I need to reintroduce that. And sometimes muscle memory is part of that, even though it might seem like that naturally happened and I have more busy things going on in my life. Maybe I need to get myself into a league and play and get myself going, right? But in terms of like actual activities, it's interesting when we formed this alliance that Theo's a part of. It's one thing to get a message of 5 and 5 and we're all a little crazy and sane here out there. But then we had to think, okay, tangibly, what are we telling people to do so that they can get better? And if I'm describing what happens with stress and trauma as this cumulative build over time, the best analogy I can make from a physical health standpoint is how plaque builds up in our arteries over time until it can take us down. Well, we need to get ourselves rid of that stress and trauma that's in our system. So we call the practices that help people to manage and to release and rewire that stress and trauma from our system, we call it STAR. So the acronym stands for Stress and Trauma Active Release and Rewiring. I know you've got a graphic up there to show it to people so that they can see it.
Yeah.
But essentially where that grew from was after failing all of these, medications, these 50 different medications that I took, and after failing all of these TMS therapy and shock therapy, the way that I healed was by learning how to breathe properly. I learned that there's a nerve in my neck called my vagus nerve. That's the largest nerve in my body, that when I'm always thinking about the worst case scenario and the what if scenarios, well, guess what? What are we all thinking about right now? Again, what might happen? Who might get sick? When am I going to get my job back? When is job going to return? When are sports going to return? We stop breathing properly when we think that way, whether we know it or not. The analogy that I give is, imagine a car crashed through the wall that we're in. All of us would make this noise saying, and we'd stop breathing. Well, we're doing that over and over and over again as we think about the what if scenarios, because it's like that car crashing through that door thinking, what bad is going to happen next? What bad is going to happen next? So what STAR practices are, is there a set of about 15 practices we have up on the website with 15 different practitioners, all of which champion each of these different practices. And it's everything from Qigong meditation to yin yoga to mindfulness practices to breathing practices to aromatherapy to tapping to havening. And you can actually go on each practitioner's site. It's completely free. There are YouTube videos for you to follow along. And the goal of it was to make people think about, well, shit, I go into a gym and I know that I can do elliptical, I can do a class, I can do a treadmill, kickboxing, boxing, swimming. If I know all those options are available to me to keep my physical body in shape, why is there not this list of practices that are available to me to keep my mental health in shape, right? It's almost like, if you think about how backwards we look at this topic, imagine we only cared about physical health when we were diagnosed with cancer, heart disease, or diabetes. Okay, then we'll do something about it. We'd have a hell of a lot more people that have cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. But that's what we're doing with mental health. We're waiting for that disorder to happen, like I did. By the way, I'm not pointing fingers because I did it myself. And then finally, we're doing something about it. So the goal here is to give proactive practices so that we can work on those things and help those people feel better.
Now, I know we're breaking away for a second from what I wanted to talk about regarding the specifics that we can all do during this whole virus thing, but I have a question. But before I ask that question, I actually want all of you participating to feel free to ask a question in the question tab. There's a box, not the chat, but the click on, you'll see there's a place to ask questions. So please feel free to do that if you have any questions for Eric or myself. But my thing is that I know that you do a lot of work now speaking with kids and with young adults, because a lot of this stuff happens as the brain develops before we hit 25, and then a lot of it continues from there. But just to your point, it's so essential to get this sort of mindset at an early age, because a lot of, we all know how teenagers can be, and oh, you're crazy, you're nuts, you're stop drama and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of times it's a behavior that's developing inside of them, and we need to really make sure we address those. So, tell me a little bit about your work with the kids and with the young adults, and how you're hoping to really stem a lot of that as it gets to be an issue.
Yeah, when we established we're all a little crazy in the whole Same Here global mental health movement, Same Here is a sign language sign where your thumb's pointing at your chest, 3 middle fingers curled, and your pinky is pointing out the other person. We need to reveal the common truth that exists across the entire world, which again, Corona is starting to reveal a little on its own now, that I face challenges, you face challenges. Doesn't matter what I look like, doesn't matter how old I am, doesn't matter what part of the world I grew up in. There's not a person who goes through this world without challenges. And guess what? Those challenges affect our mental health. If the only way for us to break this thing that all these campaigns talk about, which is stigma, and don't get me started with stop stigma campaigns, all they do is reinforce that there is stigma and point fingers at it. The only way we're going to come together on this topic is to say we all go through this. Every single one of us, we all have a Same Here story. So while that was the overriding marketing campaign, and that's why we got players like Theo Fleury and Shamika Holtzclaw and Keith Bullock and the likes involved, is to roll up into this message that regardless of where my trauma came from and where my past experiences came from, I'm just like everybody else. I have a story too. It then became taking those stories and forming programs to be able to go into 5 main areas of society. So we have same here schools for K through 12. We have same here sit downs for colleges and universities. Same here safe for corporate offices, because unfortunately people don't feel safe in offices talking about it for fear that they're going to be not promoted or worse, let go.
Right.
Same here service for servicemen and women. And then I guess because of my background in working with sports teams, same here sports for teams and leagues. And so what those look like is everything from, we start with a culture changing and table setting presentation, that it's amalgamation of sports meets pop culture, meets vulnerable story sharing, meets stress and trauma examples, with the goal of everyone in that room leaving understanding that mental health is not mental illness. Mental illness is just a place on the mental health continuum. We all go through this. We're all part of the same team. Now let's attack this together. From there and from that understanding, now we then do breakouts with, depending on the stakeholders in each individual group that we work with. In schools, it might be first administrators, then teachers, then students, then clubs, right? And the message is going to be different for each one of those stakeholders. So for administrators, it might be a message of, how do you balance vulnerability with the position of being an authority figure? For teachers, it might be, how do you foster communication between you and students, like using the same here scale, so that you're opening up communication, right? In the sports world, between an athletic director and their coaches, it might be, how is helping our student athletes with opening up something that's going to increase productivity on the field, right? Why do people miss foul shots? Why do people not catch football passes? So the programming, there's a standard piece of the programming, which is getting us all on the same page. And then based on the different segments that we deal with and the different areas of society that we deal with, we then dive deeper and have individual sessions with each of the stakeholders to make sure that we're creating a culture where eventually we're putting ourselves out of business. We want them to be the leaders in their space, where they can take that message and carry it with them and keep that culture going as they continue with these same practices that have been taught.
So, one of the questions that I know has been asked is, so I'm at home and I'm working and I'm going through my day and I'm sort of creeping towards the right side of that scale and I really don't want to be there, right? What can you recommend that will get me back to, is there anything I can do, in the next 5 minutes, next 2 minutes, next half hour that can make me feel better?
Yeah, so, using the gym as the analogy, and I'll give you examples quickly just so everyone can try them at home. But the one thing I want to stress is, if you and I went to the gym and then 5 other men and women went to the gym with us, so there were 7 of us, one of us our body might get better results from doing heavy weightlifting. And another person, our body might get better results from doing cardio on, elliptical, and another treadmill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why we created the STAR practices and we didn't give any onus on one practice over the others is because it's not fair to say that doing yin yoga is going to be more productive for you than doing qigong meditation. It's going to do more for you than integrative breathing practices. So I'll give 2 right now, but I wanted to preface that to say the goal of calling it a mental health toolbox is that at different times in your life, when you're feeling different things, you could pull out those different tools and try those different things, and some might work for you, some might work better. So really simple one that we can do, I call it alternate nostril breathing, is you put 2 fingers together like this, you put your finger on your nose, on the bridge of your nose, and you notice that your thumb is free and your ring finger is free. And those are the 2 fingers closest to your nostrils. So you're gonna close your thumb on the nostril that's closest to your thumb, and you're gonna breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 2 seconds, switch to the other finger and breathe out for 6 seconds. Now that same one that's open, in for 4, hold for 2, switch, out for 6. And if you notice the pattern, it's in, 4, hold, switch, 2, out for 6. Now, I personally like any type of breathing practice where the out breath is longer than the in breath because of that nerve that I was talking about, that vagus nerve. For me, the longer out breath tends to relax that vagus nerve and create what's called vagal tone, where the body actually relaxes and sends messages to the rest of the system, everything's okay. But the reason why that particular practice is helpful, people can do it just 5 times in a row. They can do it for 5 minutes. They can do it for 15 minutes. Is you're sending oxygenated blood to 2 hemispheres of your brain at the same time. What most people don't know, which I didn't know before I learned this practice, is we actually have one dominant nostril every 2.5 hours that switches. So we are actually getting more oxygenated blood to one side of our brain every 2.5 hours. Doing this practice allows the oxygenated blood to go to both sides of the brain and allow the brain to just chill, right? And now all of a sudden, instead of feeling anxious, there's this level of calm, there's this level of balance that we feel, that now we can be kind of in the mode, in the moment, right? So that's one case. Another case is this one takes a little bit longer to teach, so I won't teach the whole thing, but people can definitely go on our website and look at it. It's called tapping. So the science behind tapping is, if you think of what acupuncture is, some people don't like needles, but acupuncture is the idea that through these energy highways that we have stored energy in certain parts of those highways because we're constricting and holding ourselves certain ways. And so how do we release that stored negative energy? What tapping allows us to do is it allows us to do it without using needles. So it starts with this chop on our hand like this, hitting one point, and then there's 9 other points here, 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 and underneath our arm, where all 9 of those points hit all of the major meridians in our body, so that we're actually clearing out that negative energy that lives inside of us. And when people hear me say energy, they're probably thinking, what did this former athlete guy drink, like in an ayahuasca, type of way, that, made his brain go to this, tree hugger type of spot where he's talking about all this stuff. What I'm talking about with energy is no different than the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, and the way that we break down that food and that oxygen in the mitochondria in our cells. This is biology 101, and creates energy in our body. That energy gets stuck in certain places, and that's why we feel certain ways that we do. So these practices that I teach, these STAR practices that are available online, are meant to move that stagnant energy to create more calm in the system. This isn't foo-foo science, this is real science.
That's really cool. And it's funny because I think a lot of us, and I'm going to throw myself under the bus, but I think a lot of people do tend to think of, well, are you going to start eating some twigs, and what's going to happen next? And what's interesting is that you don't need to necessarily embrace everything that you're hearing or everything. You just pick and choose what you think really works for you. And because look, we're all different, so we all accept different types of, whether it's motivation or treatment or therapy or whatever it might be. But I like that breathing exercise. I don't know if I'll do it necessarily in public, but I think it's a pretty
well, here's an example. Like, look at yoga. The way yoga's been marketed, and no disrespect to the yoga studios that are out there, is attractive people in Lululemon tight pants doing poses because they're very attractive and they're in good shape. And so most people think of yoga, the layman thinks of yoga when they pass by a yoga studio as, oh, that's a physical health practice that gets you into better shape and gets your muscles more defined. Yoga is way more of a mental health practice than is a physical health practice. It's the controlling of our breath while we're doing certain routines. And maybe that's not as sexy to some people, so it's not sold that way, right? But I think that what holds us back as a Western society more than anything is we hear terms like Eastern, holistic, functional, and alternative, and that's why we call the practices STAR, so that people know that there's actual science behind what these things are doing to us. You don't need to be sitting there saying Om all the time, looking up into the heavens. You can do these things, and there's, again, actual real science that says that these things work for you.
Wait, I don't have to wear the tights then? Is that what you're saying?
As long as you're only showing the top half in the video like you are right now, that's fine.
Anyway, so look, let's say I'm just not having a good day, or it's just I'm really struggling, and I don't necessarily, maybe I'm alone in my home and I don't have anybody to really speak with, and maybe I don't want to speak to anybody or interact with anybody. I mean, who are some of the people I should turn to? Are there should I go get myself a dog? You know, what are some of the things that you recommend I do?
Recommend that you do if you're at home and you're just not feeling like seeing anyone, is what you're saying.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
All right, so obviously I'm a big fan of the practices regardless, right? So let's start with that. I don't think that those things can be replaced. Let me start with this, right? Because I get called, once I put my story out there, I get calls every day from people, and I need to schedule calls because then I have also business to run at the same time, but I want to be available to people more as a peer-to-peer just to help people. So I try and take about 2 calls a day from people who are going through stuff. And sometimes it's their parents calling me, sometimes it's they personally are calling me. And one of the most common things I get is, Eric, I can't get out of bed to do these things that you're talking about. So how the hell am I even going to get started? I am so out of it that I just have no energy to even move. And here's what I say to them. If the theory that I'm giving you is that energy is stored in our body and is stagnant and it stays in one place, fine, don't get out of bed. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your left arm, and I want you could be lying flat in your bed, and I want you to reach it all the way over to your right side and just hold it there. Hold it there, count to 5. Go back. Take your right arm, reach all the way over to your left side. Hold it there, right? Now turn your head as you're doing it, right? Now, why do I start with that? Because the spine, being the center part of the body, you're able to move energy out of your body even by laying there, just by starting to move your body. And the first thing that I ever did that my doctor ever had me do was take a bat into the backyard. People who love nature don't love when I tell the story, but there was a big oak tree in my backyard, and she just had me start swinging the bat as hard as I could at the tree. And why did that work? Why did I feel this release of energy, this endorphin rush come out of me? It was because unlike weight training, where we stay straight up like this, or running where we run like this, or biking where we stay straight like this, when you're doing things that are yoga-esque, like swinging a bat, like moving your hands side to side when you're in a bed, what it's doing is it's opening this flow of energy in a way that your body doesn't normally do. So what's going to happen is you're going to be able to build off of that. So what I would say to people is, yeah, you're home alone, you're not in the mood to do anything. Look, my dog is behind me, he's sleeping right now, but having a dog is great. I love having a companion. But also on top of that, it's a build. It's also not a linear build. We've all seen that chart that success looks like this instead of straight like that. If you're doing something every day where you're pushing yourself even the littlest bit, you're taking 3 steps instead of 2 steps, right? You're jogging a little bit instead of walking. Those things add up over time. And that's not cliche. It is really a build. And that's what you're looking for. And the phrase that I've ingrained in my head, because every time I'm feeling that way that you described, to not stay in that state, the phrase that I've ingrained in my head is stagnation breeds stagnation. Meaning, all your mental health tells you when you're not feeling well is to lay in bed and to do nothing, because from the time we were a little child, we had the flu, we had bronchitis, we had strep throat, and we were told, sleep in bed, take your medication, and you're going to feel better. The problem with mental health, if you remember the first symptom you asked of me when I said difficult time getting out of bed, if we're continuing to stay in bed and we think that that's our body resting, well, yeah, it rests after 1 or 2 days when we're overtired. When you're staying in bed for 2, 3, 4, and then more days, and you're staying there like a log, something's not right. And the only way you're getting out of that, the reason why active is the middle word in STAR, is because you have to actively get yourself out of that.
It's interesting because I also like the idea of what you're doing this, and that's just to get people just going anyway, just in general. And it's interesting if they can do that while I'm in bed, and it's the first step of many. Now, switching gears, now I've decided, wait a minute, I absolutely need to speak to somebody. I'm going through all this stuff. I need to pick up the phone or do a FaceTime or whatever it is. I just gotta tell somebody, I gotta talk to somebody. Do I talk to my friend, my buddy? Do I talk to a family member? Or should I talk to somebody who's a stranger? Who, and I know again, it's different for everybody maybe, but do you have a recommendation of a type of person to talk to, or which I do?
Yeah, so great question. And then I think you had a question that just came in about
Mhm.
what areas move, so we can get to that after. So in terms of talking, let me give a quick baseline to why talking is so important. When I was younger and I was going through all this stuff with my brother, I saw ads and stuff like that. It was the early stages of, go speak to a therapist or go to your guidance counselor school, stuff like that. And my mindset was, what am I going to hear from somebody else that I don't already know myself? Because I live in my head and I think about it all the time. So my thought was the way that we get help from other people is what they tell us to do, right? But what I learned was no, the biggest part of help is that I'm taking what's circling in here and think of it like putting it on a silver platter out of your brain and giving it to the other person. You're allowing what's circling in here to literally escape for an hour a week, for more than that per week. So we're all home together right now. We're all stuck in these places, or we're on video chat with people. It's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy right now to go to face with a therapist, although we'll get to therapy in a second. Use this opportunity to open up to people in your life about either stuff from the past or what you're feeling right now. Okay. And I know that like everyone's going to say, oh, people always say when you have these talks, just open up to people like it's just that easy. What I'm saying is listen to the science behind it. If you don't open up, it circles, it stays in there, it does damage, and it builds. So you're doing yourself a disservice by not talking it out. So even if you're talking to your friends and you're saying something you think is as simple as, I'm scared about if I get corona. I'm scared about if my family gets corona. I'm
Right.
scared about what might happen with, with my job coming up. Vocalizing that is such a release. Remember that term, release and rewiring. It's a release of that out into the atmosphere. Now, New York State just did a great thing because mental health usually falls on the back burner. And, Mark just put the number up there. They asked mental health professionals to donate their time. And as evidence of me being on doing these things, I usually do, face-to-face programs where you charge people. Well, I'm doing so many of these things right now, most of them pro bono, because now's the time to help people. So I don't know that it's going to happen in every state, but the number that Mark just put up there is to have 6,100 mental health professionals in New York State who volunteer to take calls. And by the way, for those of you who are in sales, that does not mean that those people are going to turn into business clients of theirs down the road, because we don't know the socioeconomic background of all those people who are asking for help. So you might have people in impoverished backgrounds who are calling, who just need that lifeline right now, who are calling to help. That's a hell of a lifeline to be able to take, to be able to call and speak to a licensed professional right now. So it starts with opening up to anyone. It can go to opening up to a therapist. The last thing I'll lead with opening up is, again, even just the action, they've shown this, of writing down what you're thinking on a pad. Hayden Hurst, the first round pick for the Ravens, who just got traded to the Falcons, who's in our alliance, he carries around a journal with him. He's not ashamed of it all because he's not one of the most vocal people, but a lot is stirring in here. And so he puts it down on paper and he writes it, and it goes a long way for him.
Well, this is all been wonderful. What I want to do before we go too much further, first of all, as you noted, please, anybody, if you do need to use that phone number, don't hesitate to do that. Secondly, is I want to share this screen real quick and just show your website, which I think is pretty important. I mean, it's a great site. It's got so much stuff going on in here. Here are just some of the athletes that are involved and some of the celebrities. I mean, there's just so many of them here. So please go to samehereglobal.org. And then what else? Where else can we go?
I think, so the website's great. The website has resources, everything from reading the stories of the people with platforms all the way to the practitioners and the star practices that we mentioned, to blogs that we do every single day about, you know, things that are happening in current events. Like, unfortunately, the latest story is about the fact that our crisis workers on the front lines are getting more calls to the suicide lines than they've gotten in a very long time, unfortunately. And then stories of everyday heroes is what we call it. So you can look through all these stories. If you go to the Same Here Alliances, in the top there, you'll see that there's an everyday hero button there. And you could literally look for stories of people that sound like you, that have been through similar things that you've been through. And it's not about, I have bipolar, I have depression, I have PTSD. It's about different people who've faced different things in their life, like divorce and job loss and breakups and all this stuff. And it runs the gamut of people with different backgrounds and different professions and all that fun stuff. So I think you'll be able to find yourself somewhere in there and not feel alone at all. And then all of our social channels, I'd say the most active ones are our Instagram and our Facebook. So Instagram is at @SameHere_global. And then Facebook is just Same Here Global. And so those two communities, you know, you combine the two of them, we're nearing 100,000 people in those two communities collectively. There's a lot of people that are basically saying, same here, I go through shit just like everybody else. There's no shame in it. Let me share what I'm going through, and I'm happy to talk about it. And that's the world that we need to create, because I'll end with this from a pitch perspective to everyone, and it's pitch because of what I care about the society, not because of what I care about with my corporation or my business. Is there's all these campaigns like talk mental health, let's talk. You know what? Those campaigns don't do anything, because if we don't unravel the universal truth, which is that we all go through challenges, that when people hear the term talk or talk mental health, they think that we're asking the 1 in 5 affected people to talk on that day, that week, or that month. And that only moves us further apart. We have to start with the universal truth that everyone is going through something. Once we've established that, once we've established Same Here is universal, we can then start talk campaigns. But until then, we're going to remain this divided society that doesn't get the bigger picture that everyone is affected.
Fabulous. Eric, as always, you're amazing.
Mark, there was one question. I don't know if you saw.
Go for it. Well, I'll read it out loud. So does that mean that pendulum-like motions are the most helpful in building a healthy rhythm or even circular patterns? So,
yeah, no, I'm happy to answer that question. So people who are way more well-versed in yoga than I am would tell you, like, I'll give you an example. There's something called the tree pose. And so you're doing this and your knees are together and you're literally leaning to the side that way, and then you're coming back up and then you're leaning to the side that way. You're bending your spine. When you're doing these things called down dog or up dog, you're bending your spine. So that bending of that spine, since it's such a long part of our body, it stores so much in there, it opens up so much of the rest of the body so that energies can be released. But what I want to be careful of in explaining that is, I was sharing the tapping example. Okay, well, tapping, you're not moving your spine at all, but you're finding other ways to do energy release without moving your spine. So I personally like mixing in different things, and I like doing a little yoga with a little meditation, with a little tapping, different things, and it helps me change it up a little bit. But yes, spinal and pendulum type swings are helpful, but the other things can be just as helpful if you learn how to use them and are able to incorporate them into your routine.
Great answer. So, I've known you for a couple of years now. It's been great to get to know you. You're always a great guy sometimes. No, I'm kidding. You're always a good guy. And, we met through Theo Fleury, who was really one of the first people that got involved with the Alliance. And, it's so great the work that you're doing. What is the best way that people can connect with you directly?
So connecting with me directly, I answer all the DMs that come through on, the Same Here _global for Instagram and Twitter. Email is just contact us at, funny enough, we haven't changed over, is weareallalittlecrazy.org. So people sometimes they hear it and they bit gets in there. We are all a little bit crazy, but it's weareallalittle.crazy.org. And also, just if you go on the website and you hit contact us, it'll send us an email that way. So on the contact page, you can get in touch with us that way. But I'm up till all hours of the night. I guess advantage or disadvantage of being single and not married and not having kids yet is that I devote my time to doing this stuff. I know, right? There's positives that come from that as well, certainly. But reach out. I love helping people. I got into this space because the help that I was able to provide people was more rewarding to me. And I know this is very hard for some people to understand. It's very hard for me to even understand that I get more satisfaction out of helping people than anything I ever did working for a professional sports team or league. And that's a very bold statement because I loved every day in the office, but I would be running back to sports if that wasn't the case. So, use me as a resource if I can. I do programs with teams and leagues. I do programs with companies and schools and colleges. And if I can help you guys out at all, I'd love to be able to do it. Or if you just want to talk one-on-one, you certainly can reach out as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And I really do encourage everyone to do that. So thanks so much, Eric. You're just another example of the types of people that I'm trying to bring on board with these MYM Live episodes, where we really focus on educating the people that are listening. And whether you're an athlete or not an athlete, it's so important to really continue to constantly learn and to, in this case here, really better yourself on a mental wellness capacity. So do me a favor, everyone participating. At the end, there's a bit of a survey. It takes you literally 30 seconds or so to whack through it. Just answer some of those questions. We'd love to hear from you. Also, go to my website, the MYM Live link that's in here to register for future episodes. There's tomorrow. I've got really another guy that's going to talk about public speaking and how we can overcome the fears of being on a stage. So many great episodes coming up. So give it a shot. Check that out. And Eric, thanks again so much for being with me. And we'll all get to do this a lot better now, hopefully. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.